Salute BookTube. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for being here. It's the end of July. It's actually recording this on August 2nd, Saturday, August 2nd. I wanted to film this yesterday, Friday night, but at around 10 p.m. I said, okay, let me start filming. I opened the camera. I was getting ready to talk, and then I was gonna fall asleep right on the camera. I was so exhausted, so tired that I just canceled and went to bed. So, went to bed early on a Friday night. But instead, I'm doing this now. Had a good sleep, well refreshed, on the weekend, um, ready to talk about books. I was also excited because today was the first day of starting new books, reading my TBR for August, which I'll make a separate video regarding the TBR for August. But I just started. It's always like a new month, new books. It's always exciting. But the other reason, I think my July reading, what I had chosen to read in July uh, wasn't exactly that amazing. I didn't have a great reading week. A reading month. I read a lot, but it wasn't. The books I read weren't that exciting, let's say. Well, not all of them, but there's still some things, and I'd like to talk about it. Um, the first book I'll start with, which I finished last, and which was the biggest one. I read this for Big Book Summer, and the rules for Big Book Summer was any book that's 400 or more pages. But this book was 800 pages, so this wasn't just a Big Book Summer. This could have been a March Mammoth book. It was really large. But I finished it. It's Paul McCartney by Philip Norman, The Life. Anybody who knows this guy is the lead singer of The Wings? Anybody? Anybody in the Wings fan club? Can anybody name a Wings song? No, this is Paul McCartney from the Beatles. I had mentioned this in my July TBR. So I read, again, I'm not a musician, I'm not a Beatles fan, I'm not a big musical super fan, musical biography reading person, but I do have a few, or more than I'd like, celebrity biographies that I've picked up in the last couple of years that I haven't read. I've just stacked them, and now I have too many, and they're taking up too much space, and I want to read them and get rid of them. So this is one of them. And my suspicions what I mentioned in my July TBR before I started reading this came out when I was reading this chunker, 800 plus pages of the Wings frontman Paul McCartney. Um, the author Philip Norman is a rock music journalist, rock journalist, written biographies of many rock stars, so that's normal in these kinds of biographies. But he had made a name for himself by writing a book about John Lennon, the other Beatle, um, the band that he was in before the Wings. Before Paul McCartney was in the Wings, he was in a small little band called the Beatles, which gets. Philip Norman wrote a book about John Lennon called John Lennon, The Life. It made Paul McCartney angry, even though John Lennon has been dead for 40 years now. Paul McCartney still got jealous of that, so he called Philip Norman and demanded that he write a fawning, positive book about him, about Paul McCartney, and that's what Philip Norman did as a obedient yes man. So this is the result, and he tries to balance the very positive. Apparently, I haven't read the John Lennon biography, but Philip Norman wrote a very sympathetic John Lennon biography, and that made Paul McCartney mad. So Philip Norman now wrote a very sympathetic Paul McCartney biography. Um, the other thing is Philip Norman also wrote a book about the Beatles called Shout. I don't know how well that was received. So he's written a biography of the Beatles, he's written a biography of John Lennon, and this is like another one now. He's doing a Paul McCartney one. And you can see the coverage of the Beatles years is quite short. And if you think about it, the Beatles really, I mean, how long did they last for? A decade? Maybe less, 8 years? By 1970, they were finished. So um, Paul McCartney had a much longer life outside the Beatles, and that's covered his years with the Wings and his later shenanigans in the 80s and 90s and his marriages, the tragic loss of his wife, but then his future marriages. And if John Lennon was killed, I think he was murdered in 1980. Paul McCartney's still alive with us. I think he's in his 80s. So this is a much larger book. And I mean, how many people really care about what Paul McCartney's life in the 90s and early 2000s was? There was the tragedy of losing his wife, Linda Eastman, but other than that, um, I don't know. So this book started well, the early years, the Beatle years, but then it just sort of goes downhill as you continue reading, because it goes on, and this figure has been in the public eye for so long. But a few things also come out from this guy. As sympathetic as Phil Norman tries to make him out to be, you can tell he's a very ruthless. He's very wealthy. He's probably the most commercial of the Beatles. Us booktubers will not, us bookish people, we're not Paul McCartney fans. We're John Lennon fans. John Lennon, because now after reading this, I'm tempted to read John Lennon. John Lennon, with his first paycheck from the Beatles, his first money he made singing and performing for the Beatles, Paul McCartney went and bought clothes or something. He bought, I think, art. John Lennon went and bought books. So I think us bookish people, we're John Lennon people. Paul McCartney, he was the cute one. But very ruthless. How they treated, especially Paul McCartney, how he treated Pete Best, whose mother gave them a platform and a place to perform. The first drummer of the Beatles, how they kicked him out, how he treated the other Beatles, how he treated his people who worked under him, how he treated the wife, his first wife, Jane. What was her name? Jane Asher. Yeah, Jane Asher. How he treated her and her family, who took him in and really gave him a home in London. How he even treated his second wife. How he treated the members of the Wings after the Beatles broke up. His relationship with Yoko Ono. They say he's a very good networker, but he's just ruthless guy. But anyway, that was the first book I read, and I'm glad it's finished. The second book I read was another English person, British subject, but also if that was bad, this one was even worse. I was reluctant to read this. I knew this would happen, but I read it anyway. I purchased the book, I read it, and now I regret that I did. This is Elizabeth the Queen Mother by Hugo Vickers. Hugo Vickers is also a tough. I think he walks around in aristocratic circles. He was friends with Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and it shows a very, very sympathetic biography of a woman. Her life begins. She's almost a nobody. Then she marries the Duke of York, who's second in line to the throne, which under normal circumstances wouldn't mean much. It wouldn't mean much, but Edward VIII, who was first in line to the throne, the crown prince, renounces the kingship because he wants to marry his American divorcee wife. So Elizabeth and her husband, the Duke of York, suddenly see themselves thrust into the monarchy and become king and queen of England. And they come at a time of a difficult time, the Second World War. Their young teenage adolescence was destroyed by World War I, and then their reign was really hampered, we can say, by World War II. Difficult times, and eventually killed her husband very young, and Elizabeth would blame Edward the Eighth, the Duke who became the Duke of Windsor when he renounced the throne. She blamed him for killing her husband or his brother because of the stresses of the war. although her husband was an inveterate smoker, so that was really what killed him. But he probably smoked a lot because of the stress of the war, and he didn't want to be king, and he was a bit of a shy character. But anyway, so her life. So she starts as a nobody. Suddenly, she's thrust to become Queen of England, and she's only Queen of England for, I want to say, 15 years. She ascended the throne in 1937, and then her husband passes away in 1952. So if my math is correct, that's 15 years. And then her daughter takes over, Queen Elizabeth II, and then she's back to being nothing again, and she becomes a widow for 50 years. We we have that interesting 15 years of her life as queen, and then after that, that's 5 years as a queen, and then 50 years as a widow, and she just and credit to Hugo Vickers, he spends I don't know 300 pages discussing her retirement at the age of, I think she was 41 when she retired, and she didn't die till she was 100 or something like that. But um, yeah, again, a sympathetic biography. She could do nothing wrong. This woman is perfect. She had one error. That one error is, it's actually, you can see it on the photo right over there. The one, I mean, there are a few mistakes that are mentioned here, but it's mostly positive. But the biggest criticism came there. I don't know if you can see that. That dress, she got a lot of stick for that. That it was very old-fashioned. That it was it was an ugly wedding dress. And Hugo Vickers, that's as far as he goes in criticism. She was criticized for lacking a bit of style, but then that changes. She gets a new designer for a new age, a new television and newspaper and color newspaper and color television age. She learns her lessons and improves with time. Not the most photogenic queen, but apparently good looking face to face, but not good in photos. So the old fashioned wedding dress didn't go too well. Uh, but this was a wedding in the 1940s. I don't think she could imagine that anybody would see it in color, in Technicolor, on a TV or in a newspaper. So anyway, there was just a few hints to understand, a few quotes I'd like to read. The difference between her husband, who becomes George VI, and her brother-in-law, who was the Crown Prince Edward VIII. I just want to read this quote, and then we'll discuss. This atmosphere of friendliness was the key to success of the new king and queen, which is Elizabeth and her husband George VI. Gone were the brittle cocktail shakers and the nightclub life of the previous reign. In its place came Sunday lunch, long walks in the park, bicycle rides, afternoon tea, and the domestic monarchy whose appeal soon found a secure nest in many a British heart. The king's tastes were modest. He loved to shoot and relished nothing more than a day on the grouse moor, or a long afternoon lying, rifle in hand, in a freezing field of kale. He loved to come home at the end of the day and installed in Princess Elizabeth his recipe for warming up: a cup of tea, a hot bath, and bed. So you can see the consternation that was happening in England and in the UK when people were worried about Edward VIII. And you can see the difference with his brother. His brother was much more of a domestic. What was that? They said he installed into Princess Elizabeth to Princess Margaret his recipe for warming up: a cup of tea, a hot bath, and bed. That was as wild as it got, afternoon tea. Very family oriented. But what would you do for a king like Edward VIII? We could use a king of England who, what was that? Brittle cocktail shakers and the nightclub life of the previous reign. Wouldn't you like that? I would love that. This, again, boring royal family with families, and I don't know. But anyway, that's what they got by removing Edward VIII from power and installing George VI. There's other things. I'm critical of a lot of these authors who write royal biographies because they are almost like insiders. They're royal insiders, and they don't want to float the boat too much. They don't want to criticize too much. They want to keep contact with royal circles so they can have privileged access. And it's you can see it here even with the there's a passage here, if I should read it. It says that well, it's actually a note, but I don't know if I should read it. But basically, it's all the journalists who went. The royal family went on a trip to Africa. I should have more of the background. Yeah, to South Africa right after the war, as a sort of holiday for their king to recuperate and for the whole royal family to recuperate after the war. They go in. It was very cold in the UK, and they decide to take a holiday in the southern hemisphere in South Africa in February, where it's summer and very sunny and very pleasant. And they go with a train of journalists, and these journalists would later become biographers and friends of the royal family. So again, I just wanted to highlight that that is an occurrence in these kind of books, and to find a really fair, neutral recollection is not always straightforward. What other things? There are some hyperbole. Here's a quote. It says, "A later plan to visit India towards the end of the war would also fail. In later life, of course, India, after the war, in 1948, India secedes from the British Empire and declares independence. In later life, the Queen Mother sometimes ventured that, had she gone to India, the outcome might have been different. And given her magical effect overseas, it is a shame that she was not given the chance to exercise it in the subcontinent." I think that's a bit pushing it. I don't think the presence of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, at the time the Queen, would have made a difference to Indian independence. No, darling, I'm afraid not. A little bit pompous. But yeah, this book is gets a bit tedious as her long life, again 50 years of widowhood, and then things like for her birthday in 1963, which I think she was 63 years old, for example, her courtier Norma Hartnell sent her red roses from his hotel in Vichy. Captain Cecile Boyd Rochefort sent toffees. Maria Flores sent a cake, while flowers arrived from the Royal Gardens and the WI at Sandringham, the National Farmers Union, and a host of other well-wishers. So we just get like what gifts, what flowers they brought for her on her random 63rd birthday. So it gets a bit tedious, but eventually she even outlives her daughter, Princess Margaret, but passes away in, I guess, the middle of 2002. But not the greatest reading experience. So again, and then added to that, I think the third one, which disappointed me, but maybe I should have been a bit more guarded. This third book I read was Amerigo, The Man Who Gave His Name to America, and it's by Felipe Fernandez Armesto. Amerigo is the masculine, the feminine is America, and South America, North America, United States of America. It's all named after this guy. And I should have been guarded because it's not the biggest book, it's a small book. And so it's a university thesis paper that has been slightly expanded to become a book, but it's not a soup to nuts biography. I mean, it is, and we know not that much about Amerigo because we have very little sources, and even the letters, there's questions to their authenticity, etc. Very not as well known, or not as many sources. So although Armesto covers his life, it's a very quick one, and it's there to sort of, I don't know, exonerate him. It's not the one biography to have of this individual. There's probably a biography that's much richer than this. This is more, again, of a sort of a professor a very, I guess, lack of a term, what's a better word for douchebag? A very pompous professor who's just expanding on his university thesis about Amerigo Vespucci, or about discovery in this period of time, in the age of discovery. I read this for Historathon. We're in Q3 of Historathon, which is reading books of history concerning the years 1500 to 1820. So this is right at the beginning of it, with Columbus in 1492. Then Amerigo, I think his first journey was 1498, but I guess we can include it in the 16th century. He lived most of his, or the rest of the story continues into the 1500s. But just to give you I had issues with this. First of all, Amerigo Vespucci was from Florence, and Florence, this was the age of Medici Florence, and he describes the rise of Florence pretty well, and Amerigo's place and his family's place in it, but that's fine. Then Amerigo decides, for strange reasons, to immigrate to Sevilla in Spain, and this is Sevilla of Ferdinand and Isabella. The Moors have been expelled from Spain. There's a new age of discovery, and Spain is slowly on the upward trajectory to its greatest historical period of time. And he describes Sevilla, and he describes the wealth of Sevilla and its growing importance. But I was a bit disappointed he didn't really mention the Islamic world's role in that, which I think, considering, Columbus traveled or set on his voyage in 1492, the same year the Moors were kicked out, and Amerigo Vespucci maybe 5 years after, to think that there was very little Moorish, for lack of a better term, Islamic influence on Sevilla or on Amerigo or on Columbus or on the travelers, was a little bit disappointing. There's little talk about Amerigo Vespucci's slave trading. He was a businessman first and foremost, much more than Columbus, who was much more idealist, much more pining for aristocracy. Amerigo was very much in it for the money, and he was a businessman and a trader most of his life. Very little talk about his slave trading is not really discussed by Felipe Fernandez Armesto in this book, small book. And then, of course, there's the pompous professor, douchebag professor, words. There's a word, I found one of the longest words I've ever found when reading any work of literature, be it fiction or nonfiction. The word is Floccinaucinihilipilification. Floccinaucinihilipilification. I had to go and Google that, but you can tell what kind of pompous professor Felipe Fernandez Armesto is, and who this book is really targeting. It's Floccinaucinihilipilification. It's easily 20 letters. I'll put it on the description. Maybe I'll title this this video reading what was it again? Floccinaucinihilipilification, which when I googled it, I forgot, I should have kept it open. Let me see if I can quickly get you the definition. It's basically something that is worthless or made worthless. The action or habit of estimating something as worthless. So yes, Floccinaucinihilipilification. Anyway, it wasn't all bad. There were some good books here. Two of them specifically that I enjoyed. One of them I enjoyed very much. The other one I thought was okay in parts. One of them is The Island That Disappeared, Old Providence and the Making of the Western World, by Tom Filing. and this is about the Isle of Providencia. There was the Mayflower. Everybody knows the Mayflower that went to England and then landed in Plymouth in Massachusetts in America, and that gave birth to the birth of America. But there was another ship that went to the Caribbean, and people thought that the Caribbean would be much better than cold, rocky, windy Massachusetts. The Caribbean had a very moderate temperate climate. The weather was good. The land was good for farming. It was just a better option, a better proposition. But when I picked this up, I was a bit skeptical. I thought the island that disappeared, Providencia, I showed the map during the TBR. It's a very, very tiny island in the middle of the Caribbean. There's Nicaragua. There's Colombia. It belongs to Colombia, but it's very far. So I thought this would be an obtuse sort of travel book, just travel writing, because it's listed as history and travel writing. So I was very skeptical. But then once I got into it, I was actually very impressed. It's that part, the making of the Western world, that gives this book ambition and it gives it heft. Most of this is a history of the Pilgrims, a history of the Caribbean, the history of England, and to an extent Spain and Colombia, and later the United States. Again, I read this for Historathon from 1500, covering the years 1500 to 1820. It's very much in that wheelhouse. Most of it is a history. It's only the last part 4, where he gets into a bit of travel writing. He actually travels there in the modern day and also talks about it. And that gets into the modern aspects. It actually crosses 1820, but most of it is covering the age of... It was the age of the 2 Ps, the Puritans and the pirates, or the privateers, and 2 very distinct kind of people, very religious, puritanical fundamentalists, and then pirates, basically. Of course, there's a third aspect, which are the slaves and the slavery, and both the pirates and the Puritans, that was their only sense of commonality. Everything else they differed on, but on slavery they all agreed. Slavery of the natives, and then slavery brought from Africa later. But again, that word, the making of that phrase, the making of the Western world, makes this book a much more ambitious book than it first appears. Just to give you an example, I'll read another passage here. It says, "The Puritan Revolution and the Civil War it gave rise to have been largely forgotten. To the contemporary ear, its theological disputes sound arcane, and the advances it secured are taken for granted. But Puritanism remains crucial to any understanding of the United Kingdom's rise to world dominance. The Puritan Revolution was the first modern revolution in that it was driven by ideological conviction, and this had a profound effect on how the English saw themselves and their place in the world. Until the 1620s, when a man spoke of his country, he usually meant the country in which he had been born. He usually meant the county in which he was born. But England's self-appointed role as defender of the true religion, in quotation marks, gave it a distinct national identity. While Puritanism was fervently anti-Catholic and anti-Spanish, it was never parochial. It might have been born in the pulpits of England's village churches, but as personified by Oliver Cromwell, it had far-reaching consequences for the balance of power in Europe and the vast empire that Britain would build over the course of the following 200 years. So again, very, very ambitious book. Again, that was discussing the Puritans and Puritanism, the English Civil War and its effect on places like Providencia and the Caribbean and America, but especially the Caribbean and Jamaica, for example, and the start of British colonialism, really. There was another part, if I can find it, was this book jumps a bit later to the 19th century, and then the traditions, the significance of the pirating age, and how that creates the first stirrings of historical fiction. The early Victorians, looking at their past, saw the pirates of this era as heroic figures who really began the British Empire, and that's when some of the first books about them were written, pirate books. we'll read a quote here. It says, "Readers thrilled by the sales of Daring Do in Alexander Esquemelion's History of Buccaneers of America were given another treat in 1724 when Captain Charles Johnson published a general history of the pirates. These books became templates for a welter of stories about pirates, castaways, and buried treasure that captured the public imagination just as events on which they were based receded further into the past. The rise of the adventure story coincided with an era of momentous changes that kept England in a state of fear and uncertainty. As London luxuriated in new finery, nostalgia became a feature of modern life, no less than consumer luxuries. Not that nostalgia was anything new for the English, for among the spurs that drove the colonists of the Providence Island Company to cross the Atlantic in the 1630s was their nostalgia for the glory days of good Queen Bess. And says, writers were quick to realize that stories from the early days of colony building could be turned into money spinners, one suitably tailored to flatter the prejudices of the book-buying public. Tales of adventure set in distant lands amid a cast of strange peoples highlighted the qualities thought to become common to all Britons: self-sufficiency, daring, and enterprise. It goes on to talk about Daniel Defoe, etc., etc. So this was a really good book. I really enjoyed this. I highly recommend it if you find it. I noticed that he has another book about the cocaine trade in Colombia in the 80s and 90s, which I've seen in my used bookshop, but I don't think it's there anymore. Had I known that it was the same author, I would have picked it up definitely, because he's a good writer, both a good historical writer and a good travel writer. Another book I read this month I thought was enjoyable. This is King of Bollywood, Shah Rukh Khan and the Seductive World of Indian Cinema by Anupama Chopra. I like this book mainly. I didn't like the Shah Rukh Khan part. Again, I have so many celebrity books, celebrity biographies, and celebrity that I'm trying to get rid of them. I'm trying to read them and get rid of them. And this is another one of them. I didn't enjoy the parts about Shah Rukh Khan, but I did enjoy the parts about the seductive world of Indian cinema. Anupama Chopra writes well about Indian cinema and how Indian cinema mirrors Indian history, especially post-independence Indian history. But the stuff about Shah Rukh Khan and his biography and his celebrity, that part of this book weakened the book. If she had made the book about Indian cinema and then made Shah Rukh Khan one of the characters, perhaps this might have been a much better book. Again, I'm getting tired of celebrity. I've realized I bought a lot of them throughout the years. I never read them. Now that I'm reading them, I'm starting to notice that I don't like celebrity biographies, and I'm gonna stop doing it. I'm gonna read what I have, get rid of them, and then that's it. It's done for me. But yeah, it raises one big question. I don't know how big this guy is in the West, but in the developing world, in the third world, he's huge. And it brings up the question of the future of, the future movie star, hotshot movie star will probably be AI. But before then, the future movie stars, if Hollywood wants to penetrate the third world and penetrate places like India or the Middle East or South America or Africa, the question is, for their male and their female stars, are they going to be looking like Shah Rukh Khan? Or are they going to be all American in quotation mark, blonde hair, blue-eyed, maybe white? That used to work, but the question is, will it work if you want to go global? We're seeing Hollywood now is a lot of animated, or not animated, but CGI. A lot of these comic book movies, they've done well in making them more diverse. But if there's going to be a star, like a star, it's an interesting question, because it looks like, again, if they want to corner the American market, only Hollywood can probably stick to what works. But if they want to have global influence and not get overawed or overshadowed by more third world movie production. It's something they're gonna need to think about, and it's the reality. Um, just a couple of more books. I know this is going long again. My goal was to finish this in under half an hour. Now my goal is to finish it in under 40 minutes. This is another book I read, Voyages of Discovery. It's a very ugly cover, but then it's very beautiful inside. Look at the photos there. Um, Very nice artwork all throughout this book. Just very nice. And then with prose, but not very great prose. This is more of a textbook kind of thing. Nothing really to write home about, just about the explorers from the Age of Discovery. This again covers the Historathon. It also comes with a facsimile of documents inside, and it's kind of like, again, I think this is intended for students, younger students, but it basically comes in a packet with, I'll show you a quick example if I can open it quickly. You open it up and it's got like historical, I guess that's upside down, just like and it's in like old kinds of paper and the original language, and then it's translated in the book. You can read the translation. I think this one is a letter of Columbus to Her Majesty Queen Isabella of Spain, that kind of thing. Again, nothing really to write home about. Another book I mentioned in my TBR, this is Grigor Avagyan, and it's Armenia and the Armenians in the World. This is another one of my reading projects. I have a bunch of books about the Caucasus, which I traveled to in 2022. I brought a bunch of books with me, and I realized I don't need 10 books. So in this year, 2025, I've been trying to read them and get rid of them, or get rid of the ones I don't need and keep the ones that are, or get rid of the ones that aren't very good and keep the ones that are good. So this was another one in that project. Of course, the other project is to read the undesirable celebrity biographies, which I'm trying to get rid of. The other goal was Historathon, which I've read some books about the Age of Discovery and the Puritanism and the Age of Colonialism. This one was for just trying to get rid of my Caucasus books. It's just a basic overview of Armenian history. Those who don't know, I've talked about this so many times now. Let's see if there's a map. Yeah, that's the Caucasus. You've got this region of the world. You've got Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. You've got Russia, a huge country to the north, and then you have two quite powerful middling countries, Turkey and Iran, to the south. And this area is very mountainous and very hard to reach. There's two mountain ranges here, the Caucasus, and I think it's called the or the Trans-Caucasus. And then you've got two seas which isolate it further. You've got the Caspian Sea and you've got the Black Sea. And so this area is very strategically, a very strategically isolated part of the world, and that means a lot of tragedy and very difficult for outside powers to really play a role. It's a very ancient land, but a very tragic land. That's what I'll say about that. I still have some more Caucasus book. I'll do my TBR for August 2025. I've got this time a novel about the region. So this month has been all nonfiction. That's my summer reading, but I'm hoping to put more fiction for next month. The last book I read, I've mentioned this a couple of times, Bad as I Want to Be by Dennis Rodman with Tim Keown. So this knocks out. I'm reading this for Summer of Sport, and I'm also reading this to get rid of my celebrity biographies. He's an interesting figure, a nonconformist. If there's anything I can respect about Dennis Rodman, he's a nonconformist. The NBA sort of. First of all, the NBA tries to highlight the scorers. The more basketball shots, more points you make, the more you score, the better. Dennis Rodman made his fame by being the best defender, rebounds, interceptions. That's what made him famous. So he sort of goes against the NBA grain and says, by focusing on on just the scorers and trying to recruiting players from college into the NBA who have very little experience, giving them huge contracts when they're unproven. This could hurt the NBA. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it's not just his biography; it's also his. The best part of this book is his critique of the NBA and the sort of how they try to create cookie cutter players. And so Dennis Rodman is definitely not cookie cutter. He's very individualistic and non-conforming. And so this was the best parts. His best parts are when he talks about what he knows best, which is basketball. There's other chapters later, of course, famously he's that's the chapter, Madonna. He dated Madonna, but that part, I mean, wasn't, again, it's not his area of expertise. So again, good in parts, but mostly good when he's talking about what he knows best, which is basketball. Although again, this nonconformist, he makes a lot of recently. This book was published in 1996. So he played for the Detroit Pistons. I don't know if JJ is listening. He won 2 titles with the Detroit Pistons. Maybe we can get a part 2 of the Michigan story. He does very well with the Detroit Pistons. He gets traded to San Antonio, where he has issues with the coach, and that creates problems, and he wasn't very successful there. And then this book ends just as he's going to the Chicago Bulls, and he joins the Chicago Bulls, and he makes predictions. He says San Antonio won't do well without me. Going to Chicago, he joins the Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan era and wins a lot of championships. So he's proven right. At least when this was written in 1996. But what I wanted to say was his involvement very recently in I think the first Trump administration, when Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, requests to meet Dennis Rodman, and Dennis Rodman becomes a diplomat for the United States. And that's, again, it goes back to what I was talking about in the with this character, Shah Rukh Khan. America, if the kind of diplomats they might have in the future, if they want to influence the third world, might look like this, or might be nonconformist like this. Perhaps if they did that, instead of getting stuffy people in suits and etc., might endear them better to the supposed third world or this global south or whatever. Just a thought. I'm not going to get into the critiques of American diplomacy, etc. today, but I just wanted to show you guys what I read in July. Like I said, I'm trying to make space in my library in 2025. So a lot of these books are not books I usually read, but books I'm trying to read and get rid of to make space. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'll make a TBR of what I'm reading in August, and I'll sign out. Salute, BookTube.